I do want to stay on this story and cross over to speak to Stephen Dreyfuss, a former prosecutor and former president of the International Association of Lawyers. It's great to have you on the program, Stephen. Obviously, this comes after weeks of mounting pressure on Biden. What do you think finally broke the camel's back here, so to speak, and got Biden to step aside?
I don't think anybody knows, although paradoxically, it may have been a gift to him to have COVID and be required to isolate and sit without public events, without campaigning, and have an opportunity to reflect with those closest to him, with his family in particular. But as a practical matter, it's not possible to believe that he did not himself recognize his physical limitations, and it must have been extraordinarily frustrating to him to know what he wanted to say and not be able to communicate it effectively as he has done effectively throughout his whole career. So I think that even more than perhaps the pressures of the leading Democrats may have made the difference. He's a very stubborn man. He still has a great deal of bitterness about the manner in which he was pushed out of the nomination by President Obama in 2016 in favor of Hillary Clinton. And I think that he was resistant because he's always, as he always puts it, been a fighter and the comeback kid and all of that. But I think he finally realized that he was going to lead his party to defeat, and that Kamala Harris would be a much stronger candidate.
Stephen Dreyfuss, do stay with us because I do want to cross back to you. I want to bring in our international affairs editor, Ketavan Goldstein, again. Ketavan, walk us through what's next for the Democratic Party now.
Well, look, there are two options, really. One is to sort of follow Joe Biden's lead and go full force on Kamala Harris as the top of the ticket and figure out the logistics of getting her confirmed at the Democratic Convention, which is going to start on August 19th. That would be the logistically, as we heard our previous guest talk about, logistically the easiest, but also in a way politically, because think about the image in the United States within the Democratic Party of setting aside the vice president, the first woman vice president, the first African-American woman vice president, in favor of somebody else, likely a white male, when she is, on top of that, the vice president and endorsed by the sitting president. It would be very complicated politically. So they'll have to make that decision, but it's not necessarily completely a done deal. It does help her a lot that Joe Biden came out very quickly after his announcement to say that he was endorsing her, and you've seen some Democrats following his lead. But there could still be some voices within the Democratic Party that say, look, this is not the top of the ticket that we had voted for. We need to give others a chance. In that case, it would be an open convention, which would be a sort of mini primary, if you will. And then there would be different candidates. The question is who right now in the leading Democrats around the U.S., whether they're senators or governors, who have potentially down the road presidential plans, maybe for 2028, risking going against the vice president right now in this short of a time could be complicated. So I think the balance right now is tipping in Kamala Harris's favor. We'll see in the next few days who comes out in supporting her. And I think the more you see sort of big figures of the Democratic Party endorsing her, the likelihood that she's going to get the top of the ticket is going to increase with that. But then there is another question that comes with, is it her? Who is her running mate? Because she's going to have to make that decision much, much quicker than any other presidential candidate in history. And the idea, the general idea, is that she would need someone to balance her weaknesses, and that doesn't necessarily represent the same demographics from the Democratic Party. She's a black woman from California, so she likely maybe will be aiming for potentially a white man from maybe one of the swing states. Some of the names that are popping out are the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. There's also Mark Kelly of Arizona. There's maybe also the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear. Kentucky is a red state, but he's managed to be reelected. So there are plenty of options. The question is, what demographic targets are they going to be looking for when she decides who to choose? And of course, everyone is going to have an opinion as to who would be the best candidate. But I think in the next few days, there's going to be a lot of discussions going on within the Democratic Party to figure out which road they take, Kamala Harris or an open convention. And then if they do go full force behind her, who is she going to pick and who is going to be the best running mate to give them the best chances to beat Donald Trump in 2024? And to go back to what Fraser was saying at the very beginning, this has really flipped completely the campaign on its head. And Donald Trump can say that she will be easier to beat as much as he wants. When you listen to what the Republicans were saying during the whole Republican convention, was that they were pretty happy to have Joe Biden because they felt that it was going to be an easy win for them. So those comments by Donald Trump don't really align with what the Republicans were saying.
Well, let's cross back to Washington and speak to Fraser Jackson, our correspondent there. Fraser, Ketavan Gorjestani just hinted at those questions that are going to be surrounding who Kamala Harris could potentially pick as vice president.
Yeah, and let me tell you, this is something that we've been discussing amongst us as journalists for quite some time, and also something we've been discussing with sources in the government and on the Hill and various different places. There are a couple of the big names that people have been bandying around as to who could potentially replace Joe Biden. Obviously, now Joe Biden says he wants it to be Kamala Harris. And when you look at people like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, he could not be vice president because he's also from California, and you can't have the vice presidential pick and the presidential pick being from the same state. So it's unlikely to be him. It's also, you have to think about somebody like Gretchen Whitmer, somebody who's been pushed as a potential future presidential candidate. Would they want to almost waste that inertia, that momentum on being a vice presidential pick and just rather go for a 2028 nomination? Or would they think that maybe being VP first would be a great shoe-in to maybe then take over the top of the ticket themselves? So that is also a question that people could be weighing. And if that's the case, you also have to look at people like Kedvan was saying, Josh Shapiro, who people have been putting forward and is somebody that has quite a lot of support within the Democratic infrastructure. There's also, interestingly, the governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, who might be a bit of somewhat of a long shot, but we were watching him when Kamala Harris went recently to North Carolina to do a campaign event, and he was extremely flattering towards Kamala Harris, was really pushing her record and what she'd done while she was VP. So a lot of ears got pricked at that time as to whether he was potentially setting himself up for a vice presidential run if Kamala did indeed become the presidential nominee, which she now could well become, given that Joe Biden has given her endorsement. So there's also people like Chris Murphy, the senator from New Jersey, which would really secure the eastern part of the United States vote. But I think Ketavan is correct. It would be probably a good idea to choose somebody from one of the key swing states to try to lock one of those down. So somebody like Josh Shapiro would be a great choice, I believe, for the Democrats. But at the moment, it is a wide open discussion. But we're going to have to find out very soon, because the nominations for the presidential election needs to be done in just the next couple of weeks. There's a quirk in Ohio state law which says that whoever is going to be the Democratic nominee has to be on the ticket and locked in by the 7th of August. That means that all those delegates that were pledged to Joe Biden are going to have to choose who is going to be his replacement candidate between August the 1st, which is when the voting will start, and August the 7th. And that is before we get to the Democratic convention, which is in mid-August. So there isn't much time now, really. And we are really in uncharted waters when it comes to presidential history. The last time there was an open convention was in 1968. And since then, we've not really had this kind of uncertainty this close close to election day. So it really is a fascinating time in American politics. And there's also questions over whether Joe Biden will remain president. He says he will. The White House that I've spoken to says that he will remain on as president. But that is not going down well with Republicans, who argue that if he decides that he's not, good enough to run for the nominee and for the next election in 2024, that he's therefore unfit to hold office in the next 4 months. The Democrats don't believe that, and neither does Joe Biden. So they're trying to hush that and to push that away. But that is likely to be a lot of noise coming from Capitol Hill over the next few months until we get to Election Day in November.
Fraser, thank you so much for that. Let's bring in Stephen Dreyfuss once again. He's a former prosecutor and former president of the International Association of Lawyers. Great to have you again, Stephen.
Thanks.
I want to get your thoughts on what Donald Trump has been saying. CNN is reporting that Trump says Harris would be easier to beat than Trump. Give us your assessment of that.
I agree with your colleagues. That's putting a good face on it. I mean, keep in mind that all of his surrogates, including his son, were just on television even this morning here, criticizing the Democrats for being anti-democratic, for trying to get rid of Joe Biden because 14 million Democrats had voted for him in the primaries. They were doing everything they could to put pressure on the Democrats to keep him because they thought he was the easier candidate to beat. From the legal perspective, Ohio has purported to change its law to eliminate that deadline. But nevertheless, because the legislature is Republican, the Democrats don't trust it and don't trust the legislature to keep that in place. So they already have scheduled a meeting this coming Friday to adopt a set of rules. This is the Democratic National Committee, to adopt a set of rules by which there would be a virtual vote of the convention delegates beginning August 1st and running through August 7th to designate the party's nominee before the convention. My view of it is that I think that Kamala Harris will choose a vice presidential candidate very quickly so that at the time of that vote, she and the vice presidential candidate can both be nominated. Then I think there are going to be contests throughout the United States because keep in mind that under American law, the qualifications for candidates running, even for federal office, are a matter of state law. So each state decides what the deadlines are and who are the legitimate candidates to be put on their ballot. I'm sure the Republicans will fight a rear guard battle and try to have a situation in which Kamala Harris does not get on the ballot everywhere in the United States. So we'll have a fight about that. As far as his leaving office, Biden's leaving office before January 20th of next year, that isn't going to happen. But we are certainly going to hear from the Republicans all sorts of pressure. But they cannot force it. Under the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the only way that the president can be removed for disability is if the vice president
Stephen,
and a majority
I'm really
of the
sorry.
president's cabinet.
I'm going to have to interrupt you there. We are running out of time, but we do really want to thank you for coming on the program and giving us your insight. To our viewers, thank you so much as well. Do stay tuned. We'll have plenty more coming up.